Hi, I'm Jeff Schwager for the Washington State Jewish Historical Society, and you are listening to the Agents of Change podcast, celebrating all the Jewish women who are making change in our state and our world every day. Today, we're looking at 5 amazing activists: Patty Fleischmann of StolenYouth, a nonprofit dedicated to ending child trafficking; Tana Senn, who represents the 41st District in the Washington State House of Representatives; Varon of Northwest Health Law Advocates, dedicated to making healthcare a basic human right; Hilary Stern, founder of the workers' rights organization Casa Latina; and Rabbi Rona Matlow, a former lieutenant commander in the United States Navy and now the only nuclear-qualified transgender rabbi in the United States. 5 powerful activists, 5 agents of change.
I was outraged. And I honestly thought to myself, what could any one person do about this problem? It's so huge. Yes, there were thousands of children being trafficked every single day, both boys and girls in India. But these organizations were saving them, one child at a time.
That's Patty Fleischmann during a TED Talk on human trafficking. Patty's the founder and executive director of StolenYouth, who used both the outrage and examples she brought home as inspiration for her organization's mission to eliminate child trafficking in Washington state. But rather than dealing with kids directly, Patty made a conscious decision to focus on raising money to help trafficked children.
You know, it's interesting. Because I'm also a therapist,
right.
Of everybody in my organization, I could do that. But no, it's you really have to be steeped in trauma-informed counseling, and I'm an adult therapist.
Right.
But we've been in situations where we've been able to meet with survivors after they've been out of the life long enough. Mm-hmm. We've had certainly many conversations with survivors, but the kids that are very recent are being taken care of and protected by these organizations, and protected well.
Mm-hmm. I imagine it's not necessarily traumatic, but certainly life-changing to meet the survivors and the people who come through those things.
There's no question. In fact, last year we had a survivor from Seattle that tells a story about being on the Burt Gilman Trail and her pimp beating her up and people riding their bike by her. And when she was rehearsing for the luncheon as the keynote speaker the night before, she got very, very emotional. And of course, as a therapist and as a mother, I was very concerned. So I went to her and I said, you do not need to do this. This is so hard. It's okay, you've come this far. You should be really proud of yourself. And she looked at me and she just said, with all the courage in the world, I have to do this. I have to do this. And can I practice some more? And she got up there and she brought it home the next day. And it was emotional and it brought the room down. There's no question. It's very, very hard to hear this, to know it's happening in our backyard, to our kids in our community. It's almost too close to home. But at the same time, when you see these survivors get out of the life and get on with their lives and have productive lives, then you just want to work harder. And that's kind of how I feel.
The kids at Mercer Island High School are a world away from the exploited children who inspire Patty Fleischmann's work with StolenYouth, but their lives are far from free of worry. These days, the thing that worries many of them most is gun violence and the rash of school shootings that have plagued campuses across the nation. Mercer Island's Tana Senn, who represents the 41st District in the Washington State Legislature, has taken their concerns to heart. Following the recent massacre at Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, in which 17 students and teachers were killed, Tana joined the kids at Mercer Island High to protest the status quo as part of the National School Walkout.
There were probably over 400 kids that came out into the amphitheater, and they'd invited me to speak, and they read the names of all the students killed in Parkland, Florida, and they recounted some of the school shootings since then even, and read poems and talked about their fear of guns and how much they hate assault weapons, and it was such a powerful moment, really inspiring.
And what did you tell them?
I told them that they have power and that their generation has the power to influence the economy and influence the way America looks at gun culture, and implored them to not let America think that brandishing a gun makes you look brave and cool, to ask friends and parents if they have a gun to lock it up, that could save their own lives, and to never let their voices be diminished, and to always vote.
Tana's activism and dedication to public service dates to her own childhood with politically active parents and Jewish values passed down from her mother's parents, Holocaust survivors who were refugees in Kenya before relocating to the United States.
I think that, and I talk about it a lot when people say, why are you in public service? And I think a lot of things that we read during Yom Kippur, who say, for the sins that we have committed against you by being xenophobic, by not taking care of the poor, by not looking out for the widow and the orphan, for, those different components, for some reason, just really resonate with me, that we are just constantly looking, or told and encouraged to look out for those who are less fortunate than us. And I think that that's something that not everybody has as a core value.
Jewish values also provided an important foundation for Hilary Stern, founder of the Seattle-based immigrants' rights organization, Casa Latina, which she led as executive director for 22 years before stepping aside in 2016. Her activist spirit was stoked by a trip to Israel during her teen years.
Well, there was quite a lot of idealism there at that time. It was before the Yom Kippur War. Mm-hmm. And just for me, it was living in a country where everybody was Jewish. That was really a different experience for not being a minority, as I felt growing up in Seattle. And also, I think maybe it was in some ways it might have to do with my social justice orientation. I think it was very exciting to be part of a bigger thing, part of constructing a new society, a new country. That, I think, did impact me.
That spirit of idealism infused the work Hilary did with Casa Latina, a nonprofit that has helped day laborers get off the streets, find work, organize, and learn English in the years since it was founded in 1994.
Well, I think that what I'm most proud of is really lifting up the voices of a group of people that really had no voice in Seattle before. Mm-hmm. And that they were only seen from the outside as kind of objects, that they were, a public nuisance, and people who, wanted to help them had their ideas of how they wanted to help them, what was best for them. And they also felt they also felt that they were in the margins and had no, had to just figure out how they could survive within the confines of what existed here, and then really being able to create an organization where they were able to gain a voice and be able to know, figure out how the system works, know how they can advocate. And so, I think the biggest thing is really having that voice and that perspective, but not just perspective of somebody like me representing it, but the same people that...
To get out of the white savior model and into the sort of self-determination.
Right.
Not everyone can advocate for themselves in every situation, especially when dealing with complex institutions like the legal system and the medical industry. Northwest Health Law Advocates, or NOLA, is a nonprofit that strives to be the consumer voice in the healthcare debate, particularly on issues like affordable coverage for low-income families, access to birth control, and confidential care for pregnant teens. NOLA is the brainchild of founder and executive director Janet Varon, a Bronx, New York native and graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School. Like many of our agents of change, the idea of working for the public good came early to Janet. Her father was a dentist who treated patients regardless of money, and she realized from a young age that not everyone could afford the health care they needed.
After college, I worked at a hospital in New York, St. Vincent's Hospital, and they had a department of community medicine, and my job was a research assistant to write up the successes of this program called Healthcare for the Homebound Elderly. And they were trying to promote this program and also get funding through, because the people they served were eligible for Medicaid and Medicare, so they were trying to get funding for this long-term home health care program, and all that was funded at the time was this post-hospital, short-term care. But they were able to demonstrate that they kept people out of nursing homes with stable conditions. Mostly people had chronic conditions or were just, old. And so we'd write up stories, data, and so on. So I got to see something of the world of policy advocacy there. And that made me think, it would be good to have a law degree to be able to have some power and ability to influence and change things for the better. So I went to law school with that in mind and really was always interested in a public interest career.
After law school, Janet moved to Seattle and worked at Evergreen Legal Services for 13 years, primarily representing low-income clients who were denied access to benefits. In 1999, she founded NOLA, shifting her focus to public policy and, in recent years, the opportunities and challenges created by the Affordable Care Act, better known as Obamacare.
So in the last few years, since the ACA, we have really been focusing on making it sure it's the best that it can be. So we were quite involved in when the Healthcare Authority and the exchange were forming their rules and their policies around how to implement that. So everything from being testers at the computers when they were starting to test the Health Plan Finder application, this online application, to working on procedures for ensuring that people could easily renew coverage when they were on.
And while the new administration in Washington, D.C. has made it more difficult than ever to ensure patients get the benefits they need, working in a relatively liberal state like Washington makes Janet's job at least a little easier.
I think living in this state that is a fairly progressive state, that is where you don't feel like you may be fighting back, trying to defend what we have at the federal level, but there's a lot of support at the state level. And there are even initiatives to improve things at the state level. I feel lucky to be an advocate in a state like this.
If living in a liberal state like Washington is an advantage for Janet Varon, it's more than that for Rona Matlow, a 22-year Navy veteran who was ordained as a rabbi after leaving the military in 2000, then began transitioning to female in 2015. Since then, she has focused her energies on counseling military veterans with PTSD as well as transgender people who are at risk. Unlike many people in the trans community, Rona's lucky to have an accepting family, including her wife of 34 years. But she understands the issues many trans people face with unsupportive families.
My dad died in '99, so, I don't have to deal with that, which is a relief, fortunately, to be quite honest. My mother, August before she died, said to me, she didn't really understand this whole business of my being trans, but she was my mother, and she was never going to turn her back on me and reject me, and that she didn't understand how any mother ever could. And I can tell you that in trans advocacy and activism and support, I have dealt with so many kids whose parents have rejected them. The largest percentage of homeless kids are queer kids whose parents would rather see them dead than queer.
It's sad.
It is very sad. And it really comes down to grossly misguided misreadings of the Bible by evangelicals. Everybody gets hung up on Leviticus 18:22. They always forget about Leviticus 18:5, which says, these are the things that you shall do to live by them. And Rashi says on that, and not die by them. Rambam and Ramban both say this means that to save a life transcends the Shabbos and every other mitzvah in the Torah. Mm-hmm. Life-saving transcends Shabbos and every mitzvah. Mm-hmm. And it's well established that allowing a transgender person to transition is life-saving. Yeah. The National Transgender Discrimination Survey shows that over 40% of trans adults have attempted suicide at least once. Mm-hmm. And the research is very clear that this is not because there is a correlation between being trans and being mentally ill, but rather it's due to all the external stressors, the disability, the inability to get work, the lack of family support, the lack of medical care, the inability to transition because of family situation, employment situation, whatever it is, the lack of health care insurance. It's not inexpensive to transition genders. Yeah. And with the exception of those who live on the West Coast, it's very, very difficult to get insurance coverage.
But with Rona and other activists in the trans community there for support, change can happen, and happen for the better. That's what all our agents of change are after, from Rabbi Rona to legislator Tana Senn, from Casa Latina's Hilary Stern to NOLA's Janet Varon to StolenYouth's Patty Fleischmann. Change for the better. For the Washington State Jewish Historical Society, I'm Jeff Schwager, curator of Agents of Change.